Hey Hammers fans, before we get started, make sure to drop a like, leave your comment, and subscribe to the channel. That way you won't miss any West Ham news. The situation surrounding Crescencio Somerville's injury exploded inside West Ham in a way no one expected, and that is precisely why the fans immediately switched to maximum alert. The club simply cannot afford to lose Somerville right now. With the way the team plays under Nuno Espirito Santo, he and Jared Bowen have basically become the oxygen of the attacking system. When one of them wobbles, the whole tactical structure loses balance, and that is why any news involving Somerville spreads through East London like fire on dry wood. This time was no different. A single piece of information was enough to turn normal concern into a heavy cloud hanging over the club. And that happens because West Ham still deals with a very clear problem: the lack of depth in attacking areas. Nuno knows this better than anyone and has been emphasizing it since he arrived, planning the January window almost as if it were a rescue mission. But until then, he must rely on what he has. And honestly, without Somerville on that wing, the team loses speed, improvisation, and the breathing space that allows Bowen to play freely. It is impressive how the two function like a double-engine counter-attacking system, giving life to the strategy that keeps West Ham competitive in their attempt to escape the lower end of the table. Somerville has become essential to this model, and when he disappears, the team feels it immediately. It is no surprise that when Somerville suffered that serious injury earlier in the year, West Ham lived through a painfully difficult period. The story is still fresh in everyone's mind. Almost 8 months out, a period that began with hope of natural recovery but ended in surgery after a failed comeback attempt. It marked the player, marked the club, and marked the supporters. That is why, when he reappeared with that brilliant cameo in the 3-0 win over Nottingham Forest, it felt like someone had hit the reset button on the attack. The atmosphere changed. The rhythm changed. It was another West Ham entirely. Since then, Somerville has been crucial under Nuno. He was even spotted taking a monumental scolding during training, not because he was poor, but because the manager knows exactly how high his ceiling is. That only increased the trust of the fans, who now see Somerville not just as a talent, but as an irreplaceable mechanism. And that is why every small hint of a physical issue still triggers immediate apprehension. After so long without the player, any sudden absence becomes a reason for questions. And that is exactly what happened now. Out of nowhere, Somerville was not even on the list for the 2-2 draw against Bournemouth, and the atmosphere changed instantly. His absence was not expected. There had been no prior sign that anything was wrong. Suddenly, Luis Guilherme appeared as a starter in a role he does not yet fully command, and the performance made that very clear. In the second half, Nuno even improvised Kyle Walker-Peters on the left wing, a solution that screams the lack of real alternatives in the squad. The team had the lead, had control, but lacked the surprise element, the player who breaks lines, accelerates, and shifts the attacking tempo. They lacked Somerville. That was when the speculation began. As soon as the information circulated that Somerville might have been injured in training during the international break, supporters immediately remembered the old injury, the heavy story that took almost a year from his career. Fear returned instantly. And it was not an exaggerated reaction. It was memory speaking. When someone goes through what Somerville went through, any small issue becomes worrying. And when that someone is a key player, the emotional impact is even greater. But in the middle of all this turbulence, a voice from inside the club emerged. One of those people who truly has direct access to the board, someone who moves around the corridors of power, someone who decided to open the box and reveal what was really happening. And from that moment, the narrative changed, even if the truth was still far from clear for those watching from outside. Fans remained in the dark, trying to understand whether the issue was serious, mild, or something in between. And here is where the story really begins to gather weight. While outside people exchanged theories and imagined worst-case scenarios, the board knew exactly what was happening. But the supporters did not. And that gap between what the club knows and what the public imagines is exactly what placed Somerville's situation at the center of attention. Nobody expected that a simple training session could revive such a heavy ghost from the past. This is the foundation of the scenario. And from here, what is truly happening to Somerville begins to take shape. Although for now, the fans still travel through uncertainty. The central point is simple. He felt something, and that alone is enough to freeze the entire club. But what he felt, how serious it is, and what it means for the next matches, those answers only begin to appear in the next part. Before we carry on, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to our channel. This is really important because it strengthens the Claret and Blue family, making our West Ham bigger and stronger every day. The truth about Somerville's injury finally came out right after the draw with Bournemouth, and it is far lighter than anyone feared. Yes, Somerville felt something during training in the international break. Yes, it was enough to keep him out of the match. But no, it has nothing to do with that devastating injury from January. No recurrence, no tear, no return of the old nightmare. What he suffered was just a minor knock, the sort that the medical department deals with using ice, a brief rest, and close monitoring. Nothing more. But the timing was so bad, so unexpected, that it created space for everyone to imagine the worst, and this had a direct impact on today's performance. And that became obvious from the very first minute against Bournemouth. West Ham went 2-0 up thanks to an extraordinary first-half performance from Callum Wilson, who simply dismantled the match. It was one of those days where he seemed to read the defenders a second before every move. He scored both goals with the composure of a veteran, delivering exactly what the team lacked without Somerville. 3 attempts, 2 goals, intelligent movement, all of it so sharp that fans almost forgot briefly that Somerville had not traveled. But that illusion did not last, because even with the advantage, the gap left by the Dutchman was impossible to ignore. Somerville's absence completely changed the team's offensive rhythm. Without him, Bowen became isolated, trapped by double marking, with no space, no quick outlet, no partner to burst forward and stretch the defense. The consequence was immediate. West Ham became predictable, and predictability in the Premier League is an open invitation for trouble. That is how Bournemouth grew into the game, increased their pressure, and pulled one back with Marcus Tavernier's penalty. It was not only a loss of intensity, it was a loss of depth, and West Ham cannot afford that. And then came one of the major talking points of the match, Luis Guilherme's performance. Nuno surprised everyone by starting him for the first time in the league. The problem was that the young Brazilian struggled with the physical demands of the match. He lost almost all his ground duels, surrendered possession multiple times, and was outmuscled by Lewis Cook in almost every interaction. He was substituted at half-time, not because of lack of talent, but because the physical level overwhelmed him. And this lack of impact only highlighted even more how much the team relies on Somerville. Nuno's reaction made that dependence even clearer. In the second half, he had to improvise Kyle Walker-Peters on the left wing, trying to replicate the space Somerville normally occupies. It did not work. The transitions lost tempo, the counters lost edge, and Bournemouth, sensing the weakness, pushed West Ham backwards. If it hadn't been for Alphonse Areola, a wall with a 9 out of 10 performance, the outcome could have been worse. He stopped everything in front of him and kept West Ham in the match. The concern around Somerville was so intense that every detail became a clue. When the team sheet showed Guilherme starting, supporters reacted with shock. No one expected Somerville to be absent without warning. And the club's silence, even if intended to protect the player, fed speculation. That was when Sean Whetstone stepped in, bringing the definitive confirmation. Somerville was injured, yes, but with a light knock, nothing resembling the previous trauma. His information immediately changed the mood. The revelation altered everything because fans had prepared themselves for the worst, not out of pessimism but memory. Months without Somerville left marks on everyone. So when he suddenly disappeared from a crucial match, it was natural to assume a serious problem. But this time the ghost was not back. The injury was minimal, the timeline short, nothing dramatic. And yet the emotional tension did not disappear entirely, because West Ham without Somerville feels like a different team. And that brings another layer to the issue: dependency. Today's match showed clearly that West Ham still does not have a functional alternative for his role. Guilherme is not ready physically. Walker-Peters cannot offer the same qualities when pushed forward. Fulkrug did not change the rhythm. Todibo had an inconsistent outing. Igor Julio struggled. Diouf oscillated. Bowen was suffocated by double marking. Without someone to share the offensive burden, the entire system becomes unstable. And now, everything points toward one big question. Will Somerville be ready for the match against Liverpool? Technically, his injury is mild. Technically, he could be available. But emotionally, supporters will only feel secure when they see him accelerating again. Until then, everything around his name feels like a delicate suspense. The truth has finally come out. Somerville is injured, yes, but it is not serious, not close to serious. And still, the apprehension lingers because only when he returns on the pitch will the supporters truly breathe again. Somerville has become more than a winger. He is the structural difference between a dangerous West Ham and a limited one. Before we carry on, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to our channel. This is really important because it strengthens the Claret and Blue family, making our West Ham bigger and stronger every day. The draw against Bournemouth and the revelation that Somerville's injury is only a light knock create a major turning point for West Ham, because they expose something the supporters may not have wanted to admit so openly. The team is built almost entirely around two players. Without Somerville and Bowen together on the pitch, everything Nuno tries to construct loses half its force. It is like a machine that runs well, but is missing the key component that makes it accelerate. Today's match showed this with almost painful clarity, as every minute revealed the difference between a system running with fluidity and a system improvising just to survive. And improvisation in the Premier League is always too expensive. Somerville has become so essential that his absence alters the entire collective behavior of the team. Bowen, for instance, shifts from being part of a double threat to being the single, predictable target. Bournemouth realized this immediately. When Somerville plays, defenders must split their attention. Without him, everything narrows onto Bowen, who becomes trapped under 2 or even 3 markers. He is still capable of magic, but cannot carry the whole system alone. Today it was clear. He ended the match visibly worn down, restricted, unable to produce the bursts that usually open space for others. Nuno's structure depends heavily on the alternation of both wings. Without Somerville, that alternation collapses. And it is within this context that the emotional weight of even a minor injury becomes significant. Supporters are not just afraid of Somerville missing a match. They are afraid of relying so heavily on a player who only recently returned from a severe injury. It feels like trusting a rebuilt engine that has only just started running smoothly again. Every knock becomes tension. Every precaution becomes speculation. Every absence becomes a warning. Knowing that today's problem is minor brings relief, of course, but does not fully erase the discomfort. Fans understand that the team without Somerville becomes something entirely different and far less dangerous. This dependence also exposes the urgency Nuno has been stressing since he arrived. West Ham need real alternatives. The gap between what Somerville delivers and what the rest of the squad can replicate is simply too large. Luis Guilherme has technique, timing, and imagination, but he is not yet physically adapted to the league's duels. He was bullied off the ball by Lewis Cook repeatedly, which is not a tactical flaw. It is an adaptation process. Fulkrug entered and made little impact. Walker-Peters, when pushed forward, was a makeshift solution. Todibo lacked consistency. Igor Julio suffered. Diouf oscillated. The team looked stretched and thin the moment Somerville was not there to create danger. That is structural, not tactical. Nuno understands this reality better than anyone. He has tried combinations, adjustments, and different player profiles. But there comes a point where the limitation is no longer about formation. It is about squad construction. Depth determines survival in this league, and West Ham's depth in attacking areas is insufficient. With the January window approaching, this need becomes louder with every match. The Bournemouth performance made something crystal clear. Every offensive absence becomes a collective problem, and a team trying to stabilize near the bottom cannot afford to suffer this way every time Somerville is unavailable. Interestingly, Somerville's growth under Nuno shows that the club are not just depending on him. They are shaping a system around him. When a manager entrusts a player with the role of being the primary source of unpredictability, it reveals how central he is to the project. Somerville returned from his long layoff not only with his physical sharpness regained, but also with a starring role that the fans had always hoped he would claim. The intense scolding he received during training was not frustration. It was demand. Demand that only exists when a manager believes a player can reach a higher level. This connection between player, manager, and supporters forms an emotional dynamic that extends beyond tactics. Somerville has become a symbol of hope for West Ham's attempt to escape turbulence. He represents more than pace or dribbling. He embodies identity. The identity of a team that wants verticality, aggression, quick transitions, and a sense of organized chaos in attack. Without him, that identity disappears. The team lose their spark, their intent, their sense of danger. And that is why even a mild injury generates unease, not because the issue is serious, but because the player's role has become irreplaceable. Despite the relief surrounding the diagnosis, the underlying concern remains. The team do not yet know how to function without him. Today exposed weaknesses that supporters had hoped would stay hidden. The lack of rotation, the lack of physical readiness among the younger players, the difficulty in sustaining attacking pressure without a runner who forces defenses backward. It is an uncomfortable but necessary truth, especially in a season where every point, every detail, every substitution can change the direction of the fight for survival. Looking ahead, everything now converges on one urgent question. How will West Ham manage this dependence? In the short term, the hope is simple, that Somerville can play against Liverpool. Technically, it is possible. Emotionally, the supporters will only relax when they see him sprinting again. Long-term, however, the club need reinforcements, options, and structure. No team survives a full Premier League campaign relying on the physical condition of a single key attacker. Today's match, combined with the injury news, served almost as a warning from fate. Either West Ham strengthen the attack, or they will continue to live on the edge every time Somerville feels the slightest knock. And so the story ends with an unusual mix of relief and concern. Relief because Somerville is fine, because the injury is small, because the nightmare has not returned. Concern because the team's performance without him exposed just how fragile the structure becomes in his absence. In a season defined by small margins, this dependence may prove decisive. Nuno will have to find solutions. The board will have to act. And Somerville will inevitably remain the emotional, tactical, and technical core of West Ham. The truth about the injury is simple. It was minor, but the impact it revealed is enormous. So that's all for today, folks. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, leave a comment, share, and of course subscribe to the channel for more. Take care, and I'll see you next time.